10:15.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the Women's Learning Group of the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue of Montreal. It is the 19th of March, 2025. Our dear Gladys will tell us the Hebrew date today. Today's program is being dedicated to the Bibas family. It just seems like every day is the 9th of Av, but hopefully this too will pass. Can you mute everybody? Ksenia, please, except for Gladys.
I'm on it because it's except for Gladys. I have to do it one at a time.
Okay.
So I'm on it while you're speaking. I know.
Right. And I would like to dedicate this program to the memory of my beautiful mother, Evelyn, of blessed memory. It is her yahrzeit. She passed away last year in April. And she grew up in a British boarding school in India under the care of her parents, her auntie, who was in Pune, India, and she and her 6 other siblings from Iran. At the time, the Shah was partnering with Hitler, and so the Americans took the Shah out and brought his son. But in the meantime, my grandparents were scared, and they sent the kids to their family in Pune, India. So speaking of English, everything English, we're going to learn about that and how the Jews were readmitted into England after 400 years of being kicked out. We're going to learn about that in our lecture today. We're lucky to have Jack Sachs to be our moderator, and he will moderate all our programs going forward. He will continue. There's just one where Ariella Cutler did a presentation for us for Menachem Begin, but that's for a later discussion. Gladys, would you like to share a few words for us before I thank our beautiful Ksenia for her wonderful work with the technical aspects of Women's Learning Group? Gladys.
Thank you, Sandra. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Women Learning Group of the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue, Montreal, to enjoy our program prepared by Sandra Kuku, Chair of the Women Learning Group, moderated by our dear friend, Jack Sachs. Today's date, March 19, 2025, 19 Adar 5785.
Mm-hmm.
Our topic today, the many dreams of Menasseh Ben Israel. A few words about Jack Sachs' biography. As a founder, inventor, and manufacturer of installation components in the cable TV industry, he has also served as a strategic advisor and consultant, leveraging over 45 years of experience in business development. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in Marketing and Management from the University of Paris in France. He has chaired the Strategic Planning Committee at the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue, Montreal. He has been married for 56 years to his wife and partner, Denise, my partner in swimming in our apartment building, and takes pride in having 3 children and 8 grandchildren. Thank you all and enjoy the program.
Senya will play for us a musical piece, and she will play for us another musical piece after our Q&A session with Jack Sachs. Thank you, Gladys.
Thank you. Thank you for your great work in preparing all these sessions.
You're most welcome. You know, I was so busy, but you prodded me on and I accepted.
You managed very well. Thank you, Sandra. I am proud of you.
Thank you. Jack, the floor is all yours.
Is there a reason why the transmission was so disturbed like this? Sandra?
You know, I have it disturbed on my screen too, but when you look at the recording, it's fluid.
You're
The
seeing
recording
it
is
disturbed? I don't see it. Well, I mean, it's playing here. Like it's playing here smoothly. So,
on mine, it's always choppy, but when I see the recording afterwards,
I mean, I
it's
think
fine.
that's the reality when I'm like, because basically I'm playing something from the internet, screen sharing it. You're all watching it on your internets. Like,
Yeah,
but that's why in the recording it's smooth because here it's playing smoothly.
exactly. So we'll see it in the recording.
It
But
was
yeah,
choppy.
Sandra, like I'm not, because
Thank
it's
you.
all recorded from the internet, like it's not,
Yeah,
I would imagine
it
that's,
goes through different portals. Yeah.
no, it's not that it's going through a different portal,
Okay,
but
let's give the
basically,
floor to our Jack Sachs.
Jack, the floor is all yours.
It's fine.
For me to start?
Yes.
Oh, good morning, everyone, and welcome.
Good morning.
It's wonderful to see you all again. I know I missed a couple of them, but I hope it will be a fascinating and inspiring session. Today, we will explore the life and dreams of a man who may not be a household name for all of us, but with courage, vision, and inspiration have a lasting impact on our Jewish history. Menasseh Ben Israel. Imagine for a moment what it would be like in a world where being openly Jewish was dangerous. That was the world Menasseh was born into, Catholic Portugal, where Jews were forced to hide their identity and live as a converso or new Christian. But Menasseh was not a man to give up on dreams. He escaped to Amsterdam, where he could finally live openly as a Jew. And what an extraordinary life he led. He became a rabbi, a writer, a printer, a philosopher, and even a friend to the famous painter Rembrandt. But perhaps his greatest dream was even more astonishing, restoring the Jewish presence in England after 366 years of banishment. Why? Because he believed that bringing Jews back to England was part of a divine plan and a necessary step toward redemption for his people and the world. By the way, the expulsion of the Jews from England, that was the first that ever happened in Europe, and that was during King Edward I and some 1290. So it took almost 400 years for this transaction to happen. And some of you might be wondering, what does this have to do with me living here in the safety and comfort of our community? Or are we really safe? The answer is everything. Because Menasseh Ben Israel, life is about never giving up on dreams, even when they seem impossible. He was a man of action. His life teaches us an important lesson, that our Jewish identity, history, and future are shaped not just by external events, but by those among us who dare to dream and act upon them. So we are to watch the video presentation of Rabbi Mir Shlovichik. I encourage you to think about this. What dreams for the Jewish people do we hold today? Who are the visionaries sharing our future today? And how does Menasseh's story inspire us, not just as Jews, but as individuals into our journeys? So now with that, let's begin the video.
It is today one of the most famous Jewish tales of observant insiders and uncomprehending outsiders. One evening in 1663, the London socialite Samuel Pepys decided to check out England's latest attraction, Jews, who had recently formed a community in the country. Pepys sought out a typical synagogue service in order to get a sense of what was for him a totally foreign faith. Unfortunately, and unbeknownst to Pepys, the evening he had selected to visit was Simchat Torah, when Jews celebrate completing the annual reading of the Mosaic Law with raucous dancing. Pepys was bewildered by what he saw. He thought Jews did this every night. He wrote in his diary, "But Lord, to see the disorder, laughing, sporting, and no attention but confusion in all their services, more like brutes than people knowing the true God, would make a man forswear ever seeing them more. And indeed," Pepys wrote, "I never did see so much or could have imagined there had been any religion in the whole world so absurdly performed as this." The truth, however, is that if Pepys had appreciated the story of this synagogue and the origins of its community, he might have reacted, not with derision, but respect and awe. As we discussed in last week's lecture about Abravanel, the Spain in which so many Sephardim flourished expelled its Jews in 1492, and many of the Spanish Jewish community went to the one place where Abravanel could not go, Portugal. Respite there seemed possible, but it was not meant to be. Forced conversion of the Jews in Portugal came in 1497. And one would think that with that, Jewish identity would have been instantly wiped out. But here too history has its surprises. For over 100 years, many Jews kept their identity in Portugal alive in secret, until a beacon of religious liberty opened in Amsterdam, and a union of Torah and Jew took place once again. Jews went to Amsterdam, circumcised themselves, and created a community there. The intellectual heart and history of the community known as Portuguese Jews or Spanish Portuguese Jews in Amsterdam can be found in the Eitz Chaim Library, in their esnoga or synagogue, the magnificent edifice that they ultimately built. The library is an incredible place, filled with scrolls and books, a repository of the wisdom of the Jews of this community. In the anteroom of the library, in Amsterdam, right before you enter, you stand on a lush red carpet, and there one sees the image of a beautiful bird rising out of the fire. This, of course, is the phoenix, and it is the symbol of the Spanish and Portuguese Jewish community in Amsterdam. For the Jews that chose this symbol, the Jews who came from Portugal to Amsterdam, the fire from which the phoenix ascends is, of course, the Inquisition. It is the all-consuming hate and persecution of Torquemada, a raging inferno that consumed their community in Iberia, appearing to destroy their Judaism forever. And yet, they are saying, the fire failed to destroy them, for they were the phoenix. The Jews flourished in Amsterdam, and during the Dutch Golden Age, they spread from the Netherlands throughout the New World and ultimately to England. These were the Jews who went from Spain to Portugal to Amsterdam to England. These were the Jews that Pepys came upon. And in truth, how could those Jews not celebrate Simchat Torah? How could they not celebrate the sacred scroll, the symbol of the Jewish faith, when their community's own miraculous resurrection testified to its very truth? Today we focus on a rabbinic leader of this Sephardic community in Amsterdam and in England, a man who more than anyone else pondered the meaning of this miracle, both of the Portuguese Jews in general and the Jewish arrival in England in particular. This is the tale of Rabbi Menasseh Ben Israel, and we will consider not only his moments on earth, but also the lessons of his legacy from Amsterdam to England to Israel from the 17th century to today. In giving a sketch of his biography, I will draw on the works of historians, including Stephen Nadler, Jane Gerber, and Gertrude Himmelfarb, and my translations of Menasseh's words are from them. As we study Menasseh's story, we will, for the first time in this series, do something unusual. We will look not only to history, but also art, because I believe that much about Menasseh's life can be discovered by studying several images that were drawn by the greatest artist in human history. This artist, of course, is Rembrandt van Rijn. And we will see images of Rembrandt that Menasseh himself impacted, and which are ultimately embodiments of Menasseh's theological worldview. I begin our discussion by quoting about Menasseh's early history from a book that I loved, Stephen Nadler's Rembrandt's Jews. Quote, this is about Menasseh. Quote, he was born in 1604 as Manuel Dias Soeiro in Madeira, a Portuguese colony off the coast of Africa not far from the Canary Islands. To a converso clan suspected of Judaizing, this was still too close to the Inquisition's grasp. So the family moved first to La Rochelle in southwestern France, and then, sometime around 1610, to Amsterdam. They were not just fleeing some abstract and general threat against new Christians. The lives, Nadler writes, of particular family members were in danger. Manuel's father, while living in Spain, had been seriously injured by the Inquisitor's methods, and there was reason to believe that he would soon be arrested once again. The authorities' suspicions of secret Judaizing were probably well grounded. For when the family reached Holland, Nadler writes, the men were all circumcised and took the name Ben Israel, son of Israel. They joined the Beth Jacob congregation, the oldest in the community. Manuel, now Menasseh, was taught in the community school by Rabbi Shaul Levi Mortera and Isaac Uziel. He was a precocious student and had a particularly fine command of both Portuguese and Hebrew. In my youth, he wrote, I was so given to rhetoric and was so eloquent in the Portuguese language that when I was 15 years of age, my speeches were very acceptable, applauded, and well received. End quote. Menasseh ultimately became one of the three rabbis of the united Portuguese Jewish community. And yet, as Nadler further informs us, Menasseh was not that respected by the laity in his own synagogue. They admired his oratorical ability, but did not see him as a Talmudic scholar. And Menasseh also did not get along with the senior rabbi of the congregation, Shaul HaLevi Mortera. Now, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, you are shocked to hear the two rabbis did not get along. We rabbis are embodiments of equanimity and open-mindedness, and we are never competitive. And you're surely surprised also to hear of a spiritual leader struggling to get along with his lay leadership. But even, ladies and gentlemen, if you can summon the imagination to conceive of all this occurring, still, I ask you, how many rabbis were actually excommunicated by the community just to teach the rabbi a lesson? But that is what happened to Menasseh. When the trustees treated Menasseh's brother-in-law in a manner that he, Menasseh, considered abusive, the rabbi protested, and Nadler writes, quote, with this challenge to their authority, the ma'amad, that's the trustees, felt they had no alternative but to issue a ban against the irate rabbi himself, who in turn replied, you are putting me under a ban? It is I who can proclaim the ban upon you. So we have this wonderful situation where the community excommunicates the rabbi excommunicates the community. Nadler continues, quote, the cherem, which prohibited Menasseh from attending services in the synagogue, cherem is excommunication, and others from communicating with him, lasted only a day, but it was enough to add to Menasseh's sense of humiliation. For good measure, he was also relieved of his official rabbinical duties for a year, end quote. And yet, despite his troubles within his congregation, the rabbi never gave up on Judaism and the Jewish people, and he focused on representing Jewry to the larger world. He was, in fact, as Nadler notes, the most famous rabbi on earth. His passion for publishing became the source of his fame. As Nadler notes, quote, he also acquired a great reputation for his own writings, especially among Christians, to whom some of them were directly addressed. He was seen among non-Jews as the foremost Jewish spokesman and apologist of his time. Gentiles sought him out as a teacher and consultant, end quote. Menasseh interacted with the Gentile intellectual world in a way that would have been quite unthinkable for any Ashkenazic rabbi of his age. He not only taught Hebrew to some of them, but he published books in Spanish and Latin arguing for the truth of Judaism to the larger non-Jewish world. And in this, Menasseh had two goals: to convince other conversos, secret Jews, to travel the same path as his own family, to come to Amsterdam or to Italy and embrace Judaism openly. But his other goal was also to make up for the century that his family had lived as Catholics by defending the honor and the truth of Judaism to the Christian world. As Nadler further tells us, one Dutch theologian, whose son had studied Hebrew with Menasseh, paid him this incredible compliment. He said about Menasseh, he is a learned and pious man, if only he was a Christian. And another rabbi in Holland referred to him as, quote, the ornament of scholars and the glorious diadem of our people in the eyes of the nations, who write learned works, the likes of which have never been seen in any lands or peoples, and their theologians consult him daily to hear his learning, end quote. Menasseh, in other words, was perhaps the first rabbi in the diaspora to truly seek to communicate Judaism to the larger world. And this passion and openness is not only out there to be studied and to be read, it can be seen. Because there's no question that Menasseh knew, and perhaps was even friends with, and I think there's no question that Menasseh knew, and perhaps he was even friends with an artist who lived in Amsterdam in the Jewish neighborhood right around the corner from Menasseh's synagogue, and that is Rembrandt. Rembrandt's drawing that you see here has often been identified as his sketch of Menasseh, but that is challenged today, and we have no really authoritative source that tells us that it is indeed Menasseh. And indeed, the only authoritative image of the man is someone who looks rather different, and that is an image from the Jewish artist Salome Italia. That is Menasseh. So how do we know that Menasseh and Rembrandt knew each other? That Menasseh actually impacted the greatest artist in the history of the world? To see this, you can go to the National Gallery in London and walk over to Rembrandt's painting, Belshazzar's Feast. During the 1630s, Rembrandt created this extraordinary image. It is a depiction of a tale from the book of Daniel in which Belshazzar, Melech Bavel, Belshazzar, king of Babylonia, in the midst of a feast, a mishteh, suddenly sees a hand come out of nowhere and write words on the wall, words that he could not read. Belshazzar was celebrating his might, utilizing the vessels taken by Babylonia from the destruction of Jerusalem, and now suddenly God is sending him a message. Only Daniel the Jew can read these letters. They are in Aramaic, and they read, Minei takelu farsin. You have been weighed in the balance, your years are numbered, you have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. And the question, obvious to anyone reading the text, is why Belshazzar could not read these words, because they're written in Aramaic, which was the language of Babylonia. When Rembrandt was deciding how to portray these letters, he sought the guidance of a famous intellect in the community, Menasseh, who informed him, based on the Talmud but incorporating his own interpretation, that the message was written vertically rather than horizontally, which is why the king could not decipher what he was seeing. We know that this came from Menasseh because this was the interpretation Menasseh advanced in one of his own books. Thus, Rembrandt gives us Hebrew letters, but in a vertical row, plain as day, just as Menasseh interpreted it. Horizontally, these Hebrew and Aramaic letters are gibberish. They would read, Mamtus Nankafe Aaron. But reading top down, vertically, they pronounce the fall of the Babylonian Empire, Menei Takelu Farsin. This is perhaps the first time in the history of Western art, or one of the few times, that an old master deliberately imports a Talmudic and rabbinic interpretation into his painting. And if we ask ourselves for a moment why aesthetically Rembrandt would have been so taken with this interpretation, it's perhaps, I think, because the Hebrew letters read in a downward motion, coherent only when read in a downward motion, captures the very theme of the painting, which is the sudden downfall of a once mighty empire. It is this propensity for empires that, like Babel, persecuted Israel, the propensity to rise and then suddenly fall. That marks the mystery of the Jews, and this perhaps intrigued Rembrandt. And so in a union of letters and story, combined the one theme, the rise of tyranny and the fall of these empires. And this, as we shall see, is a theme that will play a crucial role in Menasseh's own theology of history and his role as a statesman. Because more partnership with Rembrandt was yet to come. 20 years after Menasseh helped Rembrandt create a painting, Rembrandt returned the favor. Menasseh wrote a book which he called La Pietra Gloriosa, the glorious stone, which was about the rock on which the patriarch Jacob fled in the book of Genesis when he was fleeing from Esau, his brother. As the illustrator for the first print of the book, Menasseh sought out the artist from his neighborhood, Rembrandt van Rijn. And this marks, I think, the only collaboration, genuine collaboration, between a rabbi and a great artist in the history of Western art. In his first edition of the book, Rembrandt gave him 4 drawings, including one of Jacob asleep. Vayachalom v'inei sulam mutzav arza, v'rosho magia shamayma v'inei malachei Elokim olim v'yordim bo. And behold, he dreamt and saw a ladder stretching from earth to heaven, and behold, angels of God ascended and descended upon it. This is what Rembrandt gave us for Menasseh's book. What is the meaning of this dream? Menasseh drew on the rabbinic text Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer in arguing that the rise and fall of angels represent the assortment of empires that would persecute, conquer, and exile the Jewish people throughout their history. But in the end, those that rose would also fall, just like the angels, up and down. And the stone of Jacob on which he slept, that glorious stone, would ultimately shatter all empires that sought the destruction of the Jews, and Israel would endure. Now we must pause to note how astonishing this is as a subject for a book he's writing for the non-Jewish world and drafting originally a non-Jewish artist. What a brave case this is to make to Christian society, a Christian world in which the Jews were to a great extent still persecuted. We see, however, that Menasseh, who thanks to his writing was the most famous Jew in existence, is proudly proclaiming to Christendom that he believed that Judaism was true, that the Jews remained chosen, and that they were eternal. And to understand his pride and his fearlessness, I think we have to understand the sacrifice and the heroism that lay at the heart of the origins of his community. The Amsterdam Portuguese community descended, as we said, from Jews who had been burned at the stake for being secret Jews, and moreover, once offered freedom in Amsterdam, Menasseh's family and many other Spanish and Portuguese Jews had given up all that Portugal had offered in order to build religious lives anew, undergoing circumcision painfully as adults to embrace the faith of their fathers. And what this meant to someone like Menasseh is that with this God-given freedom came obligation to proudly reflect one's faith. Professor Alan Carey, writing in a slightly different context, has written that since those days in Amsterdam, quote, the fires of the Inquisition have burned out, and so far as one can see, the church would not have rekindled, even if it has the power to do so. But the fierce pride and tenacity which they engendered in the Sephardim have persisted, even though the motivating force has disappeared, end quote. This is the pride that Menasseh makes manifest again and again. Pride in the Jewish people, in their interpretations of the Bible, in their religious tradition, in their refusal to knuckle under to persecution. And in La Pietra Gloriosa, the Glorious Stone, this book that he made originally together with Rembrandt, Menasseh made the case that tyrannical empires rise and fall, but that Israel endures. Menasseh further noted that in contrast to the countries from which his brethren came, where religious persecution had led to the murder of martyrs, Judaism, he argues, believes that all those who live moral lives, no matter their denomination, are ultimately rewarded by God. As he put it, quote, to live with equity, to offend no one, not to take the goods of others, not to dishonor one's neighbor, but to be charitable towards him, to live soberly and with temperance. How could anybody who does all this not be recompensed? All adore the first cause, each in his own way. He who lives according to the law of nature is pious and will have his reward, end quote. In other words, Menasseh argued that whereas other faiths saw those outside their faith as bound for hell, for Judaism, quote, the pious of the nations of the world will have their part in the time to come, end quote. But, and this is a big but, Menasseh also warned in this book the nations that they would be judged in the end of days for abusing the Jewish people. Quote, the Messiah will receive those nations that do not tyrannize Israel. Thus, in La Pietra Gloriosa and other writings, Menasseh is seeking not to convert the world to Judaism. Rather, he's seeking to theologically change the way the Christian world thinks theologically about the Jews, and to thereby change the fate of Jews politically as well. Menasseh is asking the world, if the Jews are rejected by God, if they are no longer central to his divine direction of history, then how do you explain their eternity, their endurance? How do you explain the philosophical enigma that the Phoenix of Amsterdam embodies? That the Inquisitions of Spain and Portugal, the ghettos of Venice, the expulsions throughout Europe could not destroy us. And instead, Jews continue to produce scholars, intellectual genius, and a dazzling tradition that Menasseh himself embodied. That's the question he's putting to the Christian world. And furthermore, he's arguing, if the Jews endured amidst so much hate, if countries in which Jews were welcomed flourished, and if countries like Belshazzar's Babylonia, which assaulted Israel, ultimately fell, then should not that fact of history, he is saying, hint to the statesmen of Europe that ultimately they too will be judged by whether they tyrannize or welcome the Jewish people. Menasseh's arguments that he's putting out there fearlessly reminds me of the story of when the Protestant theologian Karl Barth in the 20th century met the Jewish theologian Michael Wishograd, and Barth said to Michael, "You Jews have the promise, but not the fulfillment. We Christians have both promise and fulfillment." And Wishograd replied, "With human promise, one can have the promise but not the fulfillment. But a promise of God is like money in the bank. If we have his promise, we have his fulfillment. And if we do not have the fulfillment, we do not have the promise." There's a period of silence, and then Karl Barth said, "You know, I never thought of it that way." Menasseh boldly argues for the eternity of God's promises, and he places the Jewish people at the heart of history and founds his worldview on this dramatic premise. And astonishingly, beautifully, it is the small drawing that Rembrandt produced for La Pietra Gloriosa that perfectly and profoundly portrays all that Menasseh believed. Until this book, in every artistic image of Jacob's dream throughout the history of art, by and large, the patriarch is usually at the foot of the ladder in his dream. But Rembrandt, as published by Menasseh, mysteriously illustrates the tale in a manner in which the patriarch seems to float mysteriously, sleeping on his rock, in the middle of the ladder, all while asleep on his stone. But for Menasseh, who's drawing on earlier rabbinic interpretations, Jacob in his dream saw the stone on which he slept as being the foundation stone of a future temple in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, as the ladder is meant to represent, as the ladder extends over Israel, Jerusalem for Menasseh lies at the spiritual center of the Holy Land. And indeed, for Menasseh's worldview, Jerusalem lies at the center of all existence. And ladies and gentlemen, there is actually more to this image than meets the eye. Museums today contain some of Rembrandt's earlier attempts at this illustration for the Book of Menasseh's. And if you look at some online, you'll see that Rembrandt originally imitated all other artists in placing Jacob at the foot of the ladder. But the final version was changed, which meant that Menasseh had insisted that Rembrandt amend the image, which would make this, even more than Belshazzar's feast, the first artistic creation in the history of Western art that was a true partnership between Old Master and Rabbi. As Simon Schama writes in his biography of Rembrandt, quote, "Alterations Rembrandt, made in the States suggest that he and the Rabbi worked closely together. No, Menasseh must have said, on looking at a pull of Jacob asleep, positioned logically at the foot of the ladder. He must be, you see, in the middle. Halfway up, Rembrandt might have responded. Surely not. Oh yes, Menasseh would have said, for asleep he is in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is in the center of the world." End quote. That's how Schama imagines the conversation between Rembrandt and Menasseh Ben Israel. This image was thus made by Rembrandt, but at the instruction of Menasseh, and it captures Menasseh's own vision and worldview. For Menasseh Ben Israel, Jerusalem is at the center of the ladder, and the angels that rise and fall represent the various kingdoms that had conquered Jerusalem, that had set their sights on Jerusalem, that had placed Jerusalem and the Jewish people at the center of their imperial ambitions. And every one of those monarchies rose and fell. This picture then tells us something about Jewish history, something which remains true today. This is Menasseh's image through his instructions. Jacob at the epicenter of the dream. Jerusalem at the epicenter of the dream. Angels olim viordim, ascending and descending. Menasseh is not only giving us a theological and artistic vision, he is giving us his political perspective, which will lie at the heart of his statesmanship. He's presenting us in an image the essence of Jewish history, which every truly Jewish statesman must bear in mind, and when appropriate, openly enunciate to the world. It's a vision captured here in the picture, but it was given succinct and eloquent expression by my hero, Menachem Begin, when he was told by Jimmy Carter that he, Begin, faced Israel's last chance to make peace. Begin replied, "Our people lived thousands of years before Camp David and will live thousands of years after Camp David." In other words, Begin is saying, perhaps this moment is right for the Jewish people to make an agreement, perhaps not. But the eternity of the Jews and Judaism remains a fact, and it's something that the Jewish statesman must bear eternally in mind. This book, La Pietra Gloriosa, was written by Menasseh in Spanish for the non-Jewish world, and it illustrates what made him unique. Menasseh was a rabbi who not only sought to learn from the wisdom of the ages, but to impact it, not only to derive benefit from the best in literature and art, but to help create it and utilize the wisdom of Judaism in order to do so. And most audacious of all, he seeks not only to engage Christians throughout Europe, but to impact them, influence them, inspire them, to ponder from their own religious perspective the theological and political implications of the mysterious endurance and wanderings of the Jews. And most interestingly of all, Menasseh sought political achievements from these theological engagements. And indeed, Menasseh's publications had set the stage for him to do just that. Already in 1650, he had written an earlier work, The Hope of Israel, a book embracing the possibility that remnants of the 10 lost tribes were to be found in the New World, in the Americas. Menasseh further noted that his own community had opened up a Sephardic congregation, a Jewish community, as far away as Recife in Brazil. And he argued it is the dispersal of Israel around the world that will ultimately bring the redemption and the restoration of Jerusalem. His book, The Hope of Israel, inspired great interest among Christian millenarian messianists who read the book in England and drew conclusions about the implications of Menasseh's assertion. For if it was God's plan for Jews to travel across the world, and if only after every realm had Jews within it could the redemption of the world truly occur, then these Christians in England knew there was one realm, an island, from where Jews had been absent since 1290. This, of course, was England. Thus, following the publication of The Hope of Israel in 1650, Menasseh, around the very time that he was teaming up with Rembrandt on La Pietra Gloriosa, his son Samuel, Menasseh's son Samuel, made his way on a sort of expedition to England, ahead of his father. La Pietra Gloriosa was published in 1655, and it's at this same moment as Menasseh is publishing Rembrandt's picture of Jacob's dream that this rabbi decided to embark on achieving a dream of his own, which was to audaciously seek for the Jews to be readmitted to England, putting forward to Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector of the country, who had a strong interest in the Hebrew Bible, the implications of all of Menasseh's theological works up to this moment, arguing that the Jewish journey to every land on earth was part of God's plan, and that for the Messiah to come, or from Cromwell's perspective, for the Messiah to come back, from Menasseh's perspective, for the Messiah to come for the first time, England had to allow the Jews into Cromwell's realm, that Israel's arrival in England would bless it and accrue for it a divinely favored status. Menasseh's epistle to Cromwell requested more than permitted presents for the Jews. He wrote, quote, "If it please your highness, it results that the Jewish nation, though scattered through the whole world, are not therefore a despicable people, but as a plant worthy to be planted in the whole world and received into populous cities, who ought to plant them in those places which are most secure from danger, being trees of the most savory fruit and profit, to be always most favored with laws and privileges or prerogatives, secured and defended by armies." In other words, ladies and gentlemen, Menasseh is asking for equality and liberty in a realm where Jews had not been permitted to dwell for centuries. He added, quote, "My intention is to try if by God's good hand over me I may obtain here for my nation the liberty of a free and public synagogue, wherein we may daily call upon the Lord our God, and besides to sue also for a blessing upon this nation and people of England, for receiving us into their bosoms and comforting Zion in their distress." Menasseh, then, is asking for the restoration of full Jewish rights, for Jews to be part of society and to be able to participate in England openly as Jews. In 1655, he travels to England, meets Cromwell, presents him with this petition, and it's hard to think of an act of Jewish political statesmanship more audacious in the history of the diaspora up to this point, journeying to a land where Jews are still technically banned, to advance the welfare of the Jews, and doing so as a rabbi in the name of Judaism. Cromwell assembled a council at Whitehall, and throughout December of 1555, the matter was debated vigorously and publicly. Cromwell was enormously sympathetic to the case that Menasseh made, but others in the government were opposed, and the historian Jane Gerber describes what happened next. Quote, "It was agreed only that there is no law which forbade the Jews' return into England, on the assumption that the expulsion had been a matter of royal prerogative and therefore affected only the people immediately concerned at the time. No law was passed to admit the Jews to England, end quote. In other words, the council ended its discussions in December without officially allowing all that Menasseh sought. As 1656 began, Menasseh stayed in England and entered what I believe to be the most remarkable moment of his career. The man who had worked as a rabbi now acts as a statesman, lobbying prominent Englishmen on behalf of his plan for his people. There will be no parallel to this until Herzl goes to see the Pope and Gentile political leaders to argue for the restoration of the Jews in a state of their own. But as astonishing and in the end successful Herzl will be in his goals, and of course we'll discuss this in a future lecture, Herzl knew very little about Jewish tradition and Jewish texts, whereas Menasseh combines his eloquence, his gifts for languages, and his sheer chutzpah with an immense knowledge of about Judaism as well as Western texts. And so Menasseh is simultaneously lobbying for Jewish political rights, while at the same time, in England, he is defending Judaism against its attackers. He meets with Cromwell, he meets some of the most famous philosophers in England, he debates an anti-Jewish theologian before a public crowd at the French embassy, and most incredibly, he wrote a response to a pamphlet by a lawyer named William Prynne, a pamphlet filled with anti-Semitic invective. Gertrude Himmelfarb tells us that it was possibly the power, rhetorically, of this pamphlet that had stalled Menasseh's original endeavor, that had convinced some of the members of Cromwell's government to oppose the proposal. And Himmelfarb gives us a small sampling of what exactly Prynne thought about the Jews. This is from his pamphlet. We are, for Prynne, a most rebellious, disobedient, gainsaying, stiff-necked, impertinent, incorrigible, adulterous, whorish, impudent, forward, shameless, perverse, treacherous, revolting, backsliding, idolatrous, wicked, sinful, stubborn, untoward, hard-hearted, hypocritical people. That's his judgment of the Jews. But wait, there's more. We are also, quote, given to a blind, obdurate, obstinate, impertinent, stupid heart and spirit, a reprobate sense, a cauterized conscience. How, Prynne asked, how can or dare we then receive into our Christian land such barbarous, bloody, obstinate murderers? So, ladies and gentlemen, we could put William Prynne down as undecided about the Jews. Prynne's pamphlet is filled with the usual unfortunate invective, and it joined a host of other anti-Semitic allegations made against Menasseh and his kin, including my favorite, which was that the plan of the Jews was to take over St. Paul's Cathedral and turn it into a synagogue. To all this, Menasseh composed a response called The Vindication of the Jews, which he published in English. A rabbi who grew up speaking Portuguese, who wrote in Spanish and Latin, who learned and prayed in Hebrew, spoke daily in Dutch, is now defending Jewish tradition from anti-Semitic attacks in English. Meanwhile, with no word from Whitehall as to his original request, no official final word from Whitehall as to his original request, Menasseh and the other Jews there present in England submitted a petition that they be allowed at least to use a building as a synagogue. The synagogue would be established in December of that year, 1656, and this means that at least the petition of Menasseh for a house of worship, for a rudimentary Jewish community, had its effect. In Nadler's words, it seems that Menasseh's petition, quote, was not entirely without effect. Somebody had to sign off for those things to happen. It was almost certainly Cromwell, end quote. This occurred at around the same moment that one Spanish Jew in England, Edward Robles, asked the government to be seen as a Jew rather than a Spaniard, as Spain was an enemy of England. And Robles, being considered as such, also provided for a de facto, but not de jure, allowing of Jews in England. More Jews began to arrive ultimately and took part in this small synagogue. And ladies and gentlemen, this of course was the synagogue on Creechurch Lane in the city of London that Samuel Pepys would visit several years later, seeing Jews rejoice in this community and in their history. But Menasseh would not be there to rejoice with them, because in September of 1656, in London, his son passed away, and he took the body back for burial to Amsterdam. He wrote a letter before he left to Oliver Cromwell asking for support to help pay for the journey back, and this has been rightly described by historians as an incredibly painful letter. He wrote in part, "I make my moan to your highness as the alone succorer of my life in this land of strangers to help in this present exigence." He added, "I lay myself at your feet, that I am your infinite obliged supplicant and servant." In the end, no money was received. Cromwell was again prevented by others in his government from helping this man that he clearly very much admired. Menasseh returned to the Netherlands in poverty to bury his son. He himself died soon later. One might have thought that he had died a failure, unable to achieve what he had sought. No official declaration allowing Jews back to England, just a tiny community. But Jane Gerber adds the following, quote, "However, since no declaration for readmission was made, none could be stricken from the statute books when Cromwell was overthrown, the monarchy restored, and his enactments annulled. A crestfallen Ben Israel left England in 1656, and he would not live to see the fruits of his labor. A tiny community of 40 families in 1660 would grow to 800 souls by 1695, when the Bevis Mark Synagogue was established, and would spark the curiosity of the inquisitive Samuel Pepys, who paid a visit. There were no residence limitations or economic restrictions, and English Jewry grew without public deliberations or pronouncements." End quote. The Jewish community soon in England became one of the most powerful Jewish communities on the earth. And so when we look hundreds of years after Menasseh to the Balfour Declarations, one of the seminal moments in Zionism and the birth of the Jewish state, it begins with Menasseh. Menasseh arrives, he seeks an official declaration, they build a synagogue, create a synagogue on Cree Church Lane. That's the synagogue Pepys visited. Then it becomes, later they build the incredibly beautiful Bevis Mark Synagogue, which can still be seen today, the oldest continuously used synagogue in Europe. And from there, the Jewish community grows. And the story begins with Menasseh. And so when we speak about the Balfour Declaration, that seminal moment in Zionism, we have to start from the story that we are telling here. And the truth is that the future of Zionism today will also be bound up with eloquent Jews who are willing to argue on behalf of the Jewish people, and also willing to engage Christians who around the world, many, many millions, have a deep interest. Many Christians who have a deep interest in the Jewish people. And those who undertake this task will also be inspired by the model of one Sephardic rabbi who undertook the impossible in 1655. And there is, ladies and gentlemen, I think a deep point here. The success of the Zionist project was one of the miracles of our age and one of the great achievements in Jewish history. Its leadership at the beginning of the movement was, for the most part, Ashkenazic and, to a great extent, secular. And some of these leaders often assumed that Jewish religious observance was affiliated with the diaspora, and that national Jewish statesmanship, a creation of modern Zionism. But the truth is that much about the current ritual rhythm of Jewish life stems from a community in the Holy Land, in Tzafat, Safed, the largely Sephardic, halachic and mystical community in the north, where many of our traditions today derive from, and where the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law that Jews use today, was written. Meanwhile, the years of Jewish exile were not devoid of extraordinary examples of Jewish statesmanship. And they can be found outside of the land of Israel, at least in one example, in the Sephardic communities of the West, and especially in the example of Menasseh Ben Israel, and all who followed his example. And in the end, it was both the legends and the true tales of Sephardic statesmen, as well as their mysticism and messianism, that helped make the Sephardic community natural supporters of the Zionist project, just not in the way that the secular Ashkenazi Zionist elite had planned. As Jane Gerber writes, quote, "There is no question that Sephardic Jews were Zionists. Their special blend of practical messianism and historic sentiment was fervent, whether in Yemen, Yugoslavia, Greece, Libya, or Bulgaria. Once given the opportunity to join the emergent Jewish state, almost the entire Sephardic world rose to participate in the return. Faced with the same option, most Ashkenazim stayed where they were in the lands of dispersion. They voiced their sympathies for the Yishuv with charitable donations, not by engaging in mass migration. End quote. Whereas we saw migration from historically Sephardic communities, as well as other Middle Eastern communities, such as Yemen. Ashkenazi Zionists, at the original outset of the movement, did not expect perhaps the profound impact that Sephardim would have on the Jewish state today. And this impact has, in the end, helped ensure that the state has a much more traditionally minded citizenry than many of Israel's founders might have expected. But the truth is, of course, that Jewish history is full of the unexpected. Just look, after all, to one Sephardic Jew who was not even born with a circumcision as a baby, who openly became a Jew as a teenager, who became the most famous rabbi in the non-Jewish world, a man named Menasseh who died thinking that he had failed, that his dream was dead, while it actually had a glorious future. And thus, in studying the story of Menasseh Ben Israel, we realize that there's another possible explanation for the biblical tale of Jacob's dream. This is not Menashe's interpretation, but Menashe's own life and legacy offers us this approach. Perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, the angels in the Torah do not represent kingdoms. Perhaps they represent the dream itself. Behold, the angels on the ladder rise and fall. The prospects for dreams and their success rise and fall. Like Jacob in the middle of the ladder in Rembrandt's painting, every great dreamer places his dream at the center of his life. All is oriented around it, and yet, few great dreams succeed immediately. There are successes, advancements, but at times also terrible setbacks. Its prospects rise and fall. Behold, the angels go up and down the ladder. The angels are the dream. There is no great leader without setbacks. There is no successful dreamer whose dreams' prospects have not at one time plummeted. After all, the great biblical dreamer himself, Jacob, dreamed of becoming patriarch of a people, father of a nation, but few figures in the Bible had setbacks such as his. Years of exile, fleeing his murderous brother, suffering the apparent loss of his child, ultimately ending up in exile in Egypt, only to return to Israel after his death. The angels going up and down are the dream. Every great dream fulfilled has failures, and every dreamer has moments in the wilderness. This point was made by none other than Winston Churchill in his essay on Moses. Every prophet, Churchill wrote, has to come from civilization, but every prophet has to go into the wilderness. He must have a strong impression of a complex society and all that it has to give, and then he must serve periods of isolation and meditation. That is the process by which psychic dynamite is made. Churchill wrote this essay, as Gertrude Himmelfarb notes, at a time when he was in the political wilderness, when the prospects of him achieving leadership were dim, and it seemed impossible that his own dreams of greatness would be fulfilled. Menashe's tale and the tale of Jacob that he gave us in partnership with Rembrandt allows us to appreciate why Menasseh was one of the great statesmen in Jewish history. And he became that not because his own people believed in him, but because he believed in the power and eternity of his people, and because he had the courage to seek the fulfillment of his dreams. The story of the Jewish dreamer of Sephardic Amsterdam allows us to understand the essence of Jewish dreams. The great visionaries in our history thought in universal dimensions, but like Jacob and Rembrandt's picture, they placed their Jewishness, their people, and their land at the epicenter of their vision. And all of these dreams experienced what occurred in Jacob's own vision. Angels going up and down, trials and tribulations, but that is essential to the greatest of dreams themselves. I thought about this recently when I visited the Sephardic Jewish cemetery in Amsterdam, site of their many fascinating and famous rabbis, including Menasseh Ben Israel. He lies in the Oude Kerk Cemetery, and as I stood there at his grave, I noticed something that I had not before. Because of the environment of the cemetery located on the river, many gravestones have since sunk into the ground, covered by grass, and disappeared from sight. But the grave of Menasseh has not, because it has been raised on several layers of brick. And on the other side of this grave, the following plaque appears, quote, "This grave was restored and the tablets added in 1960 by British Jews in recognition of Menasseh's part in securing the Jews to England, the return of the Jews to England. Ladies and gentlemen, I was struck by how resonant this is. His grave is symbolically and literally lifted up. He knew so much sorrow in his life, but he is carried by the generations that follow. In the end, unbeknownst to him, his efforts in England did bear fruit, and he is remembered by Anglo Jewry, the Jews who generation after generation are in his debt. Stephen Nadler, who in his later writings takes a more skeptical view of the Rembrandt-Menasseh relationship, nevertheless ends his book Rembrandt's Jews by describing Menasseh's funeral at this site in the following way, reflecting that despite the many hardships that Rembrandt faced at the time, quote, still, despite his personal collapse, he owed at least this much to his old friend. Who knew that when Menasseh left for England 2 years earlier and not long after they had finished working together on the Pietra Gloriosa, it would be the last time they would see each other. As sad an event as it was, it would take his mind off his problems for the morning. Thus, writes Nadler, among the mourners to make the trip upriver on that November day was, we can surmise, a certain illustrious but financially broken painter from the neighborhood, end quote. We cannot know whether Rembrandt came here to give a last farewell to the rabbi with whom he had worked. But we have what they created together, the fall of Belshazzar and the rise of Jewish dreams. And these images provide us with symbols of the dreams not only of Menasseh, but of the people he so fearlessly represented. Tonight, we remember his life, his courage, and his vision. May his dreams continue to only rise and not fall, and may they finally and fully be fulfilled.
Thank you so much, Ksenia. We will give the floor to Jack. But before we do, I would like to mention what coincidence. Yesterday, I was in the archives where I work at the Anglican Diocese of Montreal. And while searching for a baptism, I chanced upon the death of the Reverend Andrew Balfour. Balfour, whose declaration would not have been possible without Menasseh Ben Israel. And what does it say in this little obituary from the newspaper, Saturday, 14 February 1891? It says he leaves 8 children, all of whom are living, the sons being Reverend A.J. Balfour, rector of St. Peter's Church, Quebec, G.H. Balfour, manager of the Union Bank of Quebec, and C.J.B. Balfour of the Grand Trunk Railway. So Balfour was a big family of very high-spirited, educated individuals. Very interesting coincidence. Jack, the floor is all yours. We're so excited that you're with us.
Thank you. That was a lot of information. I mean, it's packed. I'm wondering how many people fell asleep or took a little nap. But one thing that is true, but I don't think he mentioned, or I didn't catch it, is that the change that happened in England between the Christian is that the Reformation of the Protestant, when they took over, the Puritan, which was part of it, they believed that the Jews were the chosen people. And that's why they influenced the political side to bring back the Jews, figuring this will help the community and the Protestant. And this is where Oliver Cromwell, as he mentioned, helped, and slowly, by the 1700s, the full Jews migrated back into England. But England is still recognized one of the highest in anti-Semitism in Europe. So what I would like to do, I was thinking, how do I get the animation and the interest, and to make a discussion, not just questions and answers. And what I want to bring back is that the Menasseh history story, although it's from a different time, it resonates with us today. He knew that he was not going to live long enough to see the realization of the movement of the Jewish people back to England, but his dream for himself and for future generation. And that raises a point in mind is, who do we see as people or organization or individual that live long enough, that live today long enough to take the long-term dream that we live in today? Can anyone think of that? Who do we see? Who among us, and it could be any one of us, that can translate that kind of a dream because you're thinking of future generations? Now I open the floor for any one of you if you want to have any comments on it. And then I will give you my thoughts. Anyone? Well, I was thinking in Jewish continuity, one of them is very important, is parenting and grandfathers.
Yes.
Because we play a very big role in seeing our children, and most important, our grandchildren.
Yeah.
That carry that dream of Jewishness on it. And by the way, when you think of Menasseh Ben Israel, and he mentioned, the rabbi mentioned Theodor Herzl.
Mm-hmm.
Theodor Herzl's dream was more as a Zionist for the Jewish people to have a home, where Menasseh wanted to bring them to England, not to have a home, but as a Jewish people to be able to practice their Judaism freely, compared to what they couldn't do in Spain and they couldn't do it in Portugal.
But
So
he did mention, Jack, that he was one of the proto-Zionists.
he was, but his main objective, his belief in his dream, in the divine, to me, makes him more from a religious perspective, comparatively to people like Theodor Herzl or Nathan Sharansky. It was more from a Zionist, nationalistic type approach to it. But so I'm saying parenting and grandparents. The other one that comes to mind is Holocaust survivor, what they've gone through and what they can project to educate and show to the future generation, okay, what is important and what the mistake that they went through during that particular time. So if we look at modern time today, those are very important parts. And others is like institution, like the Birthrights. The Birthrights organization, it's an excellent way to show the future younger generation, the new generation, what Israel is all about, and the evolution of Israel and the Judaism. It's very important to put the parallel of the Judaism with Israel.
Yes, Jewish continuity.
Where today, unfortunately, there's that division that is so flagrant between the secular and between the religious. And this is what needs to be bridged together for the survival of Israel. The other question that I thought of that would be important is, just for a moment, if we imagine you were a Jew in Portugal during Menasseh time, what would you have done? Would you have done what Menasseh did and moved to Amsterdam or another city? Or would you have sat and fought to drive your ideas and your freedom that you wanted to do? Anybody has any idea?
I would definitely leave.
Me too.
Amsterdam was welcoming. I mean, there were other places like Turkey and some areas in the Middle East, but I would inquire and see where I and my family could have a future.
Yeah.
That's true. And I probably would do the same if I see something like this. But that makes us think what we're going through right now in modern time with anti-Semitism.
Absolutely.
It's not such an
Anti-Semitism in Europe, anti-Semitism in Canada or in the United States. And you can see on TV everything that is going on, where people are afraid to wear their kippah, they're afraid to wear some ornament. Does that mean we got to pack up and leave?
Today we have nowhere to go except the
Oh,
moon.
But we do.
Mars.
We have
Except
Israel.
Israel.
We have
Yes.
Israel. And that's a big
Being
difference.
attacked from everywhere.
That's a big difference in today's comparatively to Menasseh's time. But the point is that I want to drive in. I think it's time to take a stand and speak out and talk about it and not hide it, comparatively to what happened during the Portugal time and the also in Spain.
Or
So-
the Holocaust.
It's not so easy to leave your own country. That
Yeah.
we had a sampling of that when the PQ came in. We were threatened. A lot of people left, but a lot stayed, and hope for the best. But in Portugal, didn't a lot of people stay and became Christian by their Judaism?
Yeah, but
Not leave the country.
I remember the time of Levesque and the time of the disturbance during the first Trudeau when the army were in the city of Montreal. But I don't think the Jews, there's nothing to compare that time with what those people went into Portugal or in Spain. Okay, so we can thank God that it would never happen to something like that. But it is important to note that if a Jew doesn't take a position and don't speak out and express his rights as a Canadian, okay, and let completely to be submerged by all those rhetoric from the people, the Palestinian, whoever, then we're creating our own problem, okay? So what I'm saying is that it's important that we carry and we have a voice to make our thoughts and our ideas to stand for who we are. But we are in a completely different context because we have the state of Israel behind us. And that makes a big difference.
Yes, Jack, if I may, Shabbos Kestenbaum personifies exactly what you're pointing towards, that he spoke out and he put out a lawsuit against Harvard for being so silent and absent in stopping the anti-Semitism on campus.
Yes.
Marla, you're here.
There. It's true, but that's one person, one person who made a lot of noise. And not too many people stand up because they're afraid.
They're afraid.
They're afraid. That's
That's what Tikva Fund is all about. Tikva is trying to do exactly what Jack is talking about.
EPA is involved, CGA is involved,
Yes.
the Bnei is involved.
Yes.
We do have organizations that stand up and talk about it. And that brings my third question is, what is our role in sharing the Jewish future? How do you see our role, our involvement in sharing that future and protecting our institutions that we live in, that we share?
Well, I think that you have to start with the children and what they learn in school. And for example, they have this bus, Habitat for Humanity, which goes around teaching about the Holocaust. And it hasn't come here, but it's gone west from Toronto, and they take their trips and they get these kids in schools and they teach the Holocaust from the bus, which is a brilliant idea. But apparently they don't have a lot of money because they haven't come to Montreal. And I've been trying to get this principal that I know from a private non-Jewish school here in Montreal to get this bus to come and talk to the kids at that school and some of the other private schools, it has not happened. They don't have the resource. They don't have the money. They don't have enough buses, but it's such a good idea to teach.
They should put it on Zoom.
Yeah. But there's nothing like being in person, and we need a lot more of that.
Did they speak to the Holocaust Museum about this? Did they approach them?
It emanates out of the Holocaust.
From here? From Montreal Holocaust Museum?
Out of Toronto.
There's no Holocaust Museum in Toronto.
No, but the Holocaust Society, whatever what's the name?
Yeah, but the biggest one is Montreal, and they should talk to them because it's really important. I mean, they have the means to do that.
Yes.
The impact of a lot of small actions, such as lighting Shabbat candles, hosting a Seder, teaching grandkids about Jewish history.
Absolutely.
Those are the small things, but they shape because they done continuously, religiously, and it's ingrained in the kids to understand where is he come from and where is he going from that part. Also, the strength of our communities involved synagogue, organization, Hadassah, Jewish Federation, all those involvement makes the big difference. And also defending Judaism in public spaces. In other words, to be vocal and to talk about it. It's not just to be within our community. If we need to defend it, we can be able to articulate it and defend it. And all those values plays a key role. And this is something that if we look at the history of Menasseh Ben Israel, for him was a dream. And he drove this part in. I mean, I know the Rabbi Soloveitchik put the painting of Rembrandt too much into the picture, but my reading, and this is, I've done it only yesterday, about Menasseh Ben Israel, it was more his own intellectual and drive that made that movement so strong to him. So I really find him as a fascinating individual, especially in that particular.
Yes, that painting, that drawing of Jacob, it was on the cover of a book that Menasseh Ben Israel wrote.
Right.
That's why he showed it.
Yes.
You know, I sometimes, my grandson of 2 years old, Samuel, I start saying the Shema Israel Adonai, and then he goes like this. And then he keeps looking for my necklace. I have a little Chanukiah. And he says, there's no Chanukiah. Where's the Chanukiah? And so these things make me so joyful every time my grandson who left, I told him the Modeh Ani. I think that it starts with each and every one of us as parents and grandparents. And
Absolutely.
If we are not married or we don't have children or grandchildren, being involved in the community. Gal Gadot, she came out and said it the way it is. And what's his name? The Syrian Jewish guy, I forgot his name, who had this big, help me out, Gigi, who had this series that talked about nothing. Seinfeld.
Oh, Seinfeld.
Jerry Seinfeld. It became viral. What happened? What did he say? Somebody was sitting next to him at a big baseball tournament. And it was huge. There were thousands of people. And he said, Jerry, my brother is in the IDF. And right now, can I connect you to him? Because he is such a fan of yours. Your show was his favorite. So he gets him on the phone with this IDF soldier in Gaza. And all of a sudden, Jerry Seinfeld gets up and says, go IDF, And that thing it went viral. And everybody was shocked. Oh, Seinfeld had the courage to do that at a time when Biden was in power and nobody would have dreamt of making it so obvious. But that's exactly what Jack is talking about.
Yeah, that's important. Well, now it's my closing statement, if you will. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for such a discussion. And today we have seen that Menasseh Ben Israel dreams are not just history, they are lessons for us today. Whether it's about having the courage to act, speaking up for our people, or balancing faith with reality, Menasseh's life reminds us that Jews are not just survivors. We are also dreamers, doers, and believers. Of course, Jews also know how to laugh. And even in the face of big dreams and challenges. So I'd like to end with a little story to keep you smiling. A Jewish man says to God every day, "Please, God, let me win the lottery. I will give tzedakah, I will help everyone." Days and weeks go by, nothing happened. Finally, heavens opens, and God in a booming voice says, "Moshe, meet me halfway. Buy the lottery tickets." So what's the lesson? Dreaming is important, but acting is just as vital. Like Menasseh, we must buy the ticket, take the step, speak up, write, teach, and lead. Thank you all, and may we all continue to dream and act for the good of the Jewish people and the world. Thank you.
And thank you, Jack, for such a beautiful holding our elbows and into Jewish unity. Thank you.
Nimrod al campo salía, miraba en el cielo y en la estrellería, vi una luz santa en la judería, que había de nacer Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. La mujer de Terach quedó preñada, de día en día él le preguntaba, ¿de qué tenéis la cara tan demudada? Ella ya sabía el bien que tenía. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel.
Cierto no haremos al verdadero él, sabemos al compadre y también como él, que por sus hijos nos venga el Goel, vivir a todo Israel.
Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel.
Who are these singers? Where do they sing from?
They
I-
are, I
I
think,
think I know them. I've seen them a few times. They if it's the same one that I'm thinking of, and I believe it is, they're from Beersheba. There's, I think, a Russian woman who is or she's from the former Soviet Republic, somewhere, one of those places, because you can see a lot of the participants seem to come from the former republics that are mainly populated by Muslims. Many of them look like they are from the Caucasus. You have, they look like they're from, I don't know, Georgia, and various of, one of those stand places or some of those stand places. But it's interesting, I find, that the choir and the musicians playing the instruments, so many of them look like they're just plain Russian, and they're absorbing. I love this. This is what's happening in Israel. They're absorbing Ladino music. We're becoming one people more and more. There's a movement towards Judaism. Apparently, 25% of the people, of Israelis, have either become more religious or have turned to religion when they never did since October 7th. Something like 3% have lost their religion, something like that. So I find this is very interesting, what is happening in a small country. Thank goodness for at least the moment, it is small, and people have, the cultures come together, the best of each culture. And I see so many faces that don't look like they come from their descendants from Spain, that they're Sephardi, and I'm sure they're developing a passion for this, and we're becoming more, as I said, more united, more one people. Even though I know there are divisions, great divisions, but I think these crises help us define ourselves.
These are the good and bad points of the melting point of Israel.
Yeah,
melting pot.
They say it's a boiling pot.
Boiling. I wish it was just melting.
Yeah, you don't want it to hurt.
Because the man with the beard, I saw in an opera on Herzl that's done by the Jerusalem Opera, and so that's why I wasn't sure if it was from the States or if it was from Israel.
No, I'm pretty sure it was Israel. When I was in Israel, we were invited actually to the beautiful theater. I've never been there beforehand, in Jerusalem. Absolutely beautiful. And this particular orchestra was there. I remember the leader, the orchestra leader, the same woman, and I'm pretty sure she's of Russian background. Some of them look, I don't know, Bulgarian. Bulgarians are Sephardi, but the audience, a lot of people were Sephardi, but not completely. And again, that made me very happy. I'm not Sephardi, of course. So, although I have some roots, some Spanish roots on both sides of the family, but the music spoke to me. I loved it. It brought, it's magnificent music, but it also evokes a whole period of Jewish history, such an important period. So, yeah. And there's some great music coming out now from Israel. Beautiful songs, meaningful songs, because of what's happening.
We have the Eurovision participant from Israel, and I hope if you have family in Europe, encourage them to vote for her, because we can vote.
I'm going to say goodbye to all of you.
Okay, thank you.
See you next time.
You were wonderful as
Bye.
usual.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. We look forward to the next one. And the next one is Noah's Ark, Mordechai Manuel Noah, proto-Zionist and American Jewish leader.
Yeah.
You know what? One of the things that was spoken about in terms of Menasseh Ben Israel, he was convinced that he had to take at least this first step to let the Jews cross over the channel and go into England, because only then, I mean, that would probably allow for the Messiah to come.
He was a hero, really. I mean, to pursue his dream that way and face Cromwell, not an easy task, I'm sure. He was a hero. I mean, I'm very glad to have known about him because I had no idea who he was.
Yeah,
Well,
and
yeah,
he started the. Sorry, go on.
No, you're just that Cromwell has a reputation of being such a cruel,
Yes,
strict person, inflexible.
exactly.
And to know something good, really good about him, that he was, I mean, his religiosity made him favor Jews. So he wasn't just a politician. He was mainly a religious person and acted according to his religious beliefs. So I find that interesting, and that sort of redeems him.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that Jack really put the spotlight on Jewish continuity. The whole lesson, the moral of the story of today is that never let go of your dreams.
Oh, yeah.
It's so important. Never let go, because you never know.
Yeah, but Sandra, for many of us in this group, we identify so much as Jews. I think if I couldn't be a Jew, I don't think I could live. It wouldn't be me. In fact, I have a theory about the Merchant of Venice, and here you have this poor fellow. He's stripped of everything: his money, his reputation, everything.
Honor.
And the last thing that happens to him in court is that they strip him of his Jewish identity. And they think they're being charitable. This is Christian charity, because they allow him to live. He's not alive. There's nothing there. There's just a shell of a person. There's a body. There's no spirit. There's no soul. There's no identity. And anyway, so back to the point. So our particular group, we identify as Jews, but there's so many people who don't know perhaps enough of the of Jewish
Of their heritage.
value of being Jewish. What's inherent in Judaism that makes you a greater person than you would have been had you not been a Jew. So they're not exposed to this. They don't know anything.
That's true.
It's like, I'm Jewish, I'm not Jewish, big deal. Let me live a good North American or Western style life, and that's it.
But
The past generation really failed in that, because that's why we have these poor American students who can't study today. That generation assimilated so much and just let go of all these values. And 7th of October is bringing us back to reality. And a lot of them are, rethinking this whole identity as Jewish. It's really important.
well, that's what I was thinking. It doesn't, it's when we have it easy, things sort of fall back into place,
Mm-hmm.
and we're very lax. But when we're threatened, which we are now, it's it gives strength to our religion. Although, like you say, Gigi, you don't understand the people who are not really living and thinking of following their Judaism in a strong way. But that makes me, I don't understand that, because we are threatened. We're threatened in numbers, and we're threatened everywhere. And, I'm surprised that more people have not taken up a stronger feeling for Judaism.
When you know that in the States, 75% of marriages are mixed marriages.
Well, yeah.
Europe,
It's a fact.
And
in Europe too.
a lot of the kids go to private schools, the Jewish schools, and they finish part of it, and then they're sent to the non-Jewish schools, and that's the end of it, because then they find partners who aren't Jewish, And that's
Children.
not a good thing for our religion, that's for sure.
Ironically, there's a movement among Christians to become Jewish. I think a lot of people listen to Rabbi Singer, and there are other Tuvia Singer, and there are a few other rabbis that seem to have a great influence. They're not meaning to convert anybody.
No.
They're just talking about Judaism, but they have a lot of former or in the process of questioning their Christianity, the whole concept of the Trinity. It's unbelievable. There are thousands and thousands of them, and many of them come from the Bible Belt, where you hear the name Jesus 1,000 times a day. And when the community knows that they're questioning the divinity of Jesus, and they're questioning whether they should, they believe in something beyond this world, there is something beyond it, and they look into Judaism, they start studying Judaism. Well, some of them get death threats, their businesses fall apart. Nobody will. I mean, it's a very difficult decision for them to become Jewish, because it will affect family life, community life, what they built up. It'll affect their children's relations with other people. So it's not an easy thing. And yet there are thousands of former Christians who have become Jews, and others in the process, or at least questioning. So it's interesting.
My dear Gigi, yesterday was the third of 4 sessions at the Anglican Diocese of Montreal that we are required, all of us, to follow this set of 4 Zooms with Kaleidoscope community from the United States. And it's all about racism and how to change our attitudes and all of that. And they're talking about intersectionality, and I haven't heard one mention of all the racism that is being done towards the Jews in all of our discussion. And yesterday, they shared with us a film that I knew about. I archived it in our digital library. The document of discovery. It happens that Christopher Columbus, when he set sail, it was the King of England. He asked, as the settlers were coming to America, he asked the Pope. He wanted to make it an edict, a decree, that if Christian people, they discover a new land, they have to take everything, the farms, the possessions, everything of the people, and they have to Christianize them all. And it's a really beautiful documentary. I can send it to you guys. And it's saying that we have to revoke this. We have to change our ways.
Thank you.
And I told them, listen, it's not. I mean, I was the one in the Anglican diocese when I arrived. It wasn't getting done, so I was the one who finished that whole chapter that we had to send to the government about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like the Anglican Diocese of Montreal's part in all of this. And only after my part was finished, Trudeau could, announce that we're ready to make this official, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because they asked all the churches that had anything to do with it. And then I said, look, it's not enough just to feel good about ourselves, that we're saying sorry. We have to do action. What are you doing about the water supply in the Indian communities that is so bad? What are you doing about all these indigenous women who are being kidnapped and killed?
Who
And
disappeared.
nobody does anything. And all you're doing is we're doing is feeling good about ourselves morally, but it has to be physical into action. The only Jew was talking about this. And I also said one thing that they asked me to put in the chat, and I said, in my faith, like Jack said, you have to put your ideas out there. I said, in my Jewish tradition, you are as important as the number of people you have lifted up. And they loved it. They said, can you put that in the chat? It's all intersectionality and this and that. And I told my son, he was here, I told him, they're teaching us to be racist. By doing this program, you're teaching us to be racist. You're talking about stressing on this. Instead, I even told them, we're not allowed to take a census of our people. The Jews are not allowed to be counted. You're only allowed to be lifted up. Who's present? So you're lifting them up. Yes, you are part of the group. And they were talking about the individuals and the communities, and I mentioned this very famous Christian author, Paul Johnson, who said, I don't know of any community, any faith that is more balanced in this term than the Jewish religion, faith, because they have the perfect balance between the collective and the individual. And I talked to them about this, and I said, I've been taught if you see something, you say truth to power, you make it right, you change what needs to be changed. But at the same time, you are part of a collective and you honor that. That's what we do on Shabbat. Nobody is more important than anyone else. On Shabbat, the shoemaker has the same level as the highest donor. We're all on the same slate. Everything comes back to zero on Shabbat.
There's so many things that I want to say, but I have to go. Let me just say
We're looking forward to your summary.
I won't be able to work on it today because I have to go out.
That's
I
fine,
wrote
that's
to you.
fine. That's fine.
Okay. I wanted to say what you said, just to respond to something that you said about we are part of a collective that we mustn't ignore, and we are also an individual, and we mustn't ignore that. So what that made me think of is that Judaism constantly fuses two opposites. It's not you're this or you're that, or you do this or you do that. No, somehow or other, they say, we see the greatness in this and the importance of this, and we see the greatness and importance of that. We have to find a way of merging the two opposites. I mean, this is how difficult that is, but it manages.
You do that with what Yochanan ben Zakkai he encouraged by doing the yeshiva at Yavne. He said you have to argue. Everybody has to bring out their point of view, and in that exchange, you learn so much. You might not agree, but that's healthy.
And also, I mean, that you're an individual. You have, and this is something else about Judaism. It promotes the idea of liberty, of independence, of freedom, just by saying God sort of opened the gates to, or not opened, exiled Adam and Eve, but basically he gave them the freedom to be individuals, to learn, etc. And it's course, with a lot of suffering. Suffering goes with it, but he let them be human. And then, of course, you have the Tower of Babel here, which to me means so evidently, so obviously, the idea of a cult. Everybody, talk the same language, which means that basically they thought the same thing. They work to reach heaven. So you think of communism, you think of fascism, etc. And God destroyed their tower and dispersed them and made them speak different languages. You've got to be an individual.
Because look at all the diversity he created. Look at the different flowers, the different flora and fauna.
Absolutely. So but you're a community, but you're not a cult. So
Yeah,
and
exactly.
this is another thing. Maimonides always spoke about balance. And it sounds so easy, balance, but it's not to be équilibré. It's not easy not to go to one extreme or the other, and to be able to, fuse the two, well, as far as you can go, to be part of this world and part of that world. It's amazing, but not go to extremes.
Barbara.
Yes, I'm here.
What are your 2 words, my love?
Well, I'm eating my lunch.
Oh, I'm so glad you joined us.
I am too, and I enjoyed this. I enjoyed it so much because, hearing about the English, like Cromwell and Samuel Pepys, and I don't know who else you mentioned.
Yeah, who would have known?
No, but people that we studied in history, hearing names that I finally remember.
Imagine he shows up at no other day but Simchat Torah. I have never seen such a barbarian way of ritualizing.
No, but that was meaningful to me. It seemed silly, but really, it was good. I enjoyed it very much today.
Yeah. By the way, everybody, if you can't hear when Rabbi Soloveitchik speaks, you can put captions on in French. Well, no, English.
Oh, and also I found this thing, original sound for musicians, : it was off. So I pressed somewhere next to it, and now it looks : on. And ever since I did that, I could hear the music without the choppiness. So you guys can try doing that.
Okay. So, ladies, I have to go, and I loved it, and I always love these conversations. Yes. I wish I could stay longer.
God bless you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Gigi. Really, you are a big asset here.
And yes, Sandra, absolutely.
Yes, and Sandra, you look great.
Oh,
I just want to tell you.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
Thank you so much. Farla, I'm so glad you're here with us today.
You know what? I want to just give you a positive word to end. When we were doing political work, this non-Jewish Catholic politician from Outremont, who was in the government, we were having dinner, and he was a conservative, actually. And he went to Israel with the group because that was the beginning, I think, of when they were taking politicians to Israel to educate them, non-Jews.
Yeah.
And this guy came back and he's sitting next to me and he says, Farla, you Jews, and I didn't know what was coming. He said, you have the most amazing history.
Oh, my gosh.
He said to me, these are exact words. He said, you people are neurotic. He says, you must stand up on the rooftops and scream that you're Jewish and you're so proud of your history. He said, that's
exactly
an amazing history. That was something coming from him.
That's what Rabbi Friedman said. He said, you know what? In the United Nations, they're all a bunch of students waiting to be taught something. So say it. We are the chosen people. So calm down, sit down. You might even learn something. Yeah. This is what the Muslim radicals want to see from us.
But
if they see us united and all of us practicing our Judaism, they're going to let go of all this charade.
Well,
That's what they're saying. That was in the video that I was showing during our Hanukkah special.
you know what, this was coming from a non-Jew, a Catholic person.
Yeah, but the Muslims are saying it themselves. That
Yeah.
the Jews are not following their Judaism. They're saying, for crying out loud, half of them don't even believe in the state of Israel. So why do you want us to believe? We have to eradicate.
Oh, wow.
We have to follow the word of God. And the Jews, they moved away from the word of God. And since then, they're no longer relevant. And we have to destroy them.
That's
But if we do what we're saying here in this forum, it's going to change the whole, cultural landscape.
right. To get more buses out on the.
Yeah, Georgette would agree with you.
Okay.
So,
Sandra, I just wanted to say, it's just one quick thing. I just
yes,
wanted to say, I'm
Monica.
sorry I was late today. I'm sorry I was late. I had a doctor's
I'm so glad you joined, but you're going to get
I
the
had an
recording.
appointment before.
That's fine. You'll get the recording.
Okay.
I'm so glad you joined us. God
Me
bless
too.
you.
You
Thank
look
you so-
amazing.
Thank you. Thank you
really
so
do.
much. So,
Thank you.
next one will be April 9, and it will be about an American proto-Zionist. Each one of these political heroes is so beautifully spoken about, and Queen Esther, I will never stop admiring her.
Oh, it's amazing. What a champion for a woman. Oh my gosh, could be half of her.
Imagine she had to put on her political hat. Like she thought, it's not the age of the prophets now. We have to be political. Acumen is what we need to survive. And she realized that. Mordecai told her, go, barge in front of the king. And if she did that, forget it. She found a way to do it. It was just brilliant. Brilliant. It was almost as brilliant as this pager story. So, guys, take care, everybody.
Have a wonderful week. See you at Shul.
God bless you. Yes. Take care.